My path back to the crossroads was short and worse, lonely. I learned a long time ago how to walk the streets of the City of Sleep. Unlike most places in Lockhart, no one spoke to strangers except when they wanted something. So, refusing eye contact was how to convey that you were a safe person to be around. People who sought eye contact were usually treated with suspicion. However, this also meant that the City of Sleep could be crowded shoulder to shoulder, and you may as well be alone on the street for how much everyone else interacted with you. Still, it was easy to make my way back to the crossroads, and I saw the path that was marked no return. In my anger at the world and anger at myself, that was the only path I saw. The witch way and the rocky road looked uninviting and dark. The lonely lane was overgrown with forever flowers, so even if I wanted to, I could never return that way. My father's home was inaccessible to me now. So I trekked down the road marked no return. The road was black and smooth with the yellow lines. I didn't know what they were for, but I stuck to the right side of the road while I walked down it. This road had a seemingly never-ending plain around it. Whether I looked to the left or I looked to the right, it never ended. There was only the road in front of me and the road behind me. Sometimes along the road there were signs with hand-painted messages. It isn't too late. It certainly was too late for me. I had no family left. My caretaker for years was now falling into the sky forever. I had no friends, and there was nothing left for me in the City of Sleep, nor on the lonely lane. It was too late for me to find anything behind me. Think about the people you love. That sign felt simply cruel. After all these years, it was clear that my mother and father never loved me. Sure, father treated me better, but he didn't seek me out in the City of Sleep. He didn't protect me from Aurora. He didn't even care enough to notice that she was there. And with Charlotte gone, there was no one left who loved me. I had to take care of myself, since I was on the road by myself. You cannot ever come back. When I saw that sign, I scoffed. I didn't want to ever come back. What is left for me in Lockhart? A reminder of who and what I am missing? If I come back, I would only be heartbroken and hurt. Not being able to come back sounded like heaven, not hell to me. I continued down the road under the overcast sky. The sun vanished behind gray clouds, and I made it to one final sign. This is your last chance. Of course this is my last chance. My only chance for a future was on this road that would never let me return. I am sure that sign was supposed to say that it was my last chance to return and go back, but it only hardened my heart as I stepped past the sign and something felt different. It was like climbing high in the mountains and the air pressure changed and your ears popped. But it wasn't just my ears popping. It was my entire body. I twisted my head and my wrists to work the tension out. After a moment, I turned to face where I was, and I realized the road was different. It was physically the same road, but instead of leading into a plain, it led from a vast forest, one where the trees stood dozens, if not hundreds of meters tall. A dark forest that looked intimidating and judgmental. It felt like it had much worse things than wolves. Turning to face the way I was walking, the path forward changed as well. Instead of an endless plain, it led to an iron gate with the name Agamemnon's Academy for Accelerated Apprenticeship. It seemed that the path that had no return led to a school. There was definitely palpable irony there, but there was indeed no way back, so I did the only thing I could do. I pushed open the iron gate and made my way up the steps. The steps were wide and made of concrete, with a ramp in the middle, and the edges of the steps were guarded by bronze lions. Large sculptures where the toes of the paws were polished, while the rest was an oxidized green. The academy had clearly been here for a long time. I made it up to the large doors, which were carved from an old oak with stained glass that portrayed an unusual scene. The man in a white robe stabbing a white doe with a spear. The glass portrayed the white deer as crying, but the man's face wasn't crying. He didn't even look upset, nor did he look stern nor stoic. I could clearly see that he was smiling. Not a mad smile, nor a smile of someone stressed, but a genuine smile of happiness from stabbing the crying deer. Trying not to think about how creepy the stained glass was, I knocked on the door. I didn't have to wait long. Not even 10 seconds after knocking on the door, a stern-looking woman with gray hair and thick glasses opened the door. She had a clipboard close to her chest, and when she saw me, she only scoffed. "Are you a student?" she asked, and I nodded. "Fine. Name?" she asked, not even bothering to give her name. Her rudeness clearly comes from years of being in charge and being used to always getting her way. Even now, she didn't dare look at me. She was focused on her clipboard, looking over the names written on there, even though she didn't know what name she was looking for. "My name is Mary Morrow," I told her as I made up another name. What my parents called me was a distant memory I could barely remember, and I didn't want to be known as Myelin Midnight here. Every time I would hear that name, I would remember Charlotte. So, for all intents and purposes, Myelin Midnight and Ava Eventide were dead. I still had my true name I called myself, something I would never tell anyone, but the name I thought of myself as. As long as I had that, it didn't matter what others called me. I saw the woman go over the list when I realized my mistake. I never registered for this school. An hour ago, I didn't even know this school existed. And even if I did, or by some miracle I was registered, it wouldn't be under a name I made up on the spot. So, what was this woman going to do? Was she simply going to refuse entry? Was she going to call security? Or was she going to kill me just for not being who I said I was? While I stood there debating whether or not to run, she cleared her throat when she saw something on her list. "Ah, Mary Morrow, there you are. We weren't expecting you quite yet, but we have your room ready," she said. Her eyes were glassy as she turned around and led me into the building. Mystified, I followed her, surprised my made-up name was already on the list. While we walked, her eyes remained glassy while she spoke and explained the rules of the school. "It's Friday now. School begins on Monday. You'll find your clothes in your room and your schedule on your desk. Students and staff select a sobriquet before school begins. You will have until Sunday to select your sobriquet. Read your handbook and it should explain anything. If you have questions, don't bother me. Bother your counselor," the woman said as she led me to a dorm room. When I turned to face her, she handed me a key. "This is your key and you won't have roommates. Agamemnon's doesn't ban guests from your room, but the consequences of what happens in your room will follow you," she said as she turned and walked away, leaving me with more questions than answers. Why was she acting so weird? Why was I already registered for this school? And is this really my next phase in life? Maybe there would be answers inside. I opened the door, and the dorm room was what I was expecting for a dorm room. 3 meters by 3 meters by 3 meters. A twin-sized bed with sheets, blankets, and a pillow folded on the mattress. A wooden closet across from the bed. A door leading to what I assumed was the bathroom. And on the far wall beneath a window looking over the forest was a wooden desk with a laptop on it, along with a handbook next to it, and on top of the handbook was an envelope. Closing the door behind me, I walked to my desk and I inspected the letter. It was unaddressed and unsealed. The only mark on it was a stamp with a torch on it. Still, though, even through the envelope, I could see it was thick from multiple pages inside. Curious, I opened the envelope and I began to read the letter, hoping for some information on what was going on. To Mary Morrow. It takes a certain strength to let go of your entire life to seek another. I did what I could over the last few years, but even I cannot do everything. Some paths you have to walk to get where you need to go. You will fall, so much more than you know, but only you can find the strength to get up and keep going. But I know you. You will never give up, and you will find a strength inside you that you never knew you had. However, that strength will not come easily. You will have many hard choices, and you won't always make the right choice. Doesn't mean you won't get on the right path. As for why the school believes you belong here, I registered you before Charlotte fell. Again, I am so sorry that happened. It wasn't her choice, nor mine. It wasn't anyone's choice, and it wasn't anyone's fault. No, not even yours. I do not think Agamemnon's is a good idea, but the path you chose led here, so I could either leave you to struggle and starve, or I could open the door and give you a chance. As much as it breaks my heart seeing a young hero in an academy for villains, it is still better for you than trying to be homeless in the Seven Cities. Remember, though, even though I opened the door for you, it is up to you to keep your role, and your success comes down to your choices and your actions. Learn and be quiet at first. When you have learned enough to blend in, then it will be safe for you to stand out. Success makes for a great way to convince others you belong, but belonging needs to come before success. You are no longer on Lockhart, but on Earth. Specifically, you are in the Empire of the Seven Cities on the continent of Vespucci, on the world of Earth. Lockhart is behind you now, and you can never return the way you came. Can you return to Lockhart at all? That is a question I cannot answer. The kind of person you would need to become is someone who never would leave her home. I still believe in you, but you ultimately need to prove me right or wrong. That being said, it won't be for me, but for you, that you make that choice. I don't know if that's easier or harder for you. Read over your manual well. You can adapt quickly and blend in easily. But be warned, when masking, it is exhausting. Do not wear your mask so long that you can no longer put it down. And even though you are technically not beyond my reach, I will not be assisting you anymore like I have before. Your tuition is paid and you have a weekly stipend. Be cautious with yourself, but also learn when to take risks and when to tell yourself yes. Again, I am so sorry for what you went through, and I am more sorry for what you must face. You can be tomorrow's hero, or you can be tomorrow's villain. But no matter what you choose, you're never going to be nobody special. So weigh your actions and choices. Sorry for the rambling nature of this letter. It is so hard to know what is important to you when you see things the way I do. You see things differently. I want to warn you about every misstep, about every scrape, about every trick and gamble, but I cannot warn you of everything. Even if I did, it wouldn't mean you could avoid them all. So I try to focus on what is important, and ultimately knowing you, even if you tripped every step of the way, you will still end your path beaten, bloody, bruised, and victorious. You choose what victory and triumph means for you, and you will find it. Signed, LGEC, aka Aurora Eventide. When I saw the name, I tore up the letter and left the scraps in the wastebasket. Why would the monster who chased me out of my home now want me to succeed? The way she wrote, it didn't feel like her. It felt like someone else wrote the letter. Still, as I let my anger calm down, I did realize she did something right for me. She got me into Agamemnon's Academy for Accelerated Apprenticeship. If nothing else, I was certain I would get good grades, and I could manage my own life. I was beyond her now, and I would prove that I didn't need anyone. I was strong, and I would handle myself far better than my mother ever did. I took the time, after letting my anger cool into resolve, to read over the student's manual. As I read over the rules, and I memorized the rules and procedures, I learned far more about the Academy than they probably ever intended. Over that weekend, I barely slept as I went over the rules and the history of this odd world. Lockhart's history was simple. It was created by Adansi. She brought people there, and for the last 75,000 years, people lived lives and little of it was worth recording. On Earth, there were wars. So many wars. Famines, colonies, revolutions, counter-revolutions, and countries. Lockhart didn't have nations. There were leaders, there were local governments, but the idea of a government that was the highest authority in a geographic area never occurred to us. That was one of the biggest shocks. The idea of nations and nationalism, when you didn't grow up with it, it was such a foreign idea that my mind kept chewing on, even when I was supposed to be thinking about other things. The closest analogy I could use to describe it to others is like being raised in a family without parents. You have cousins, aunts, uncles, sisters, brothers, siblings, and you function completely fine. But then you go out and encounter other families. Every other family has parents who make rules, who raise the children, and are considered the head and heart of every household. A head and heart that you spent your entire life without, and you were completely fine. But everyone who learns that you grew up without parents look at you like you are an impossibility. Still, though, as long as I didn't talk about the seven cities with the other students, I was certain I would fit in pretty well. The history of the school was also fascinating. Apparently, it was founded during the Great War to train extraordinary people in how to use their abilities to help the Seven Cities and the League of Nations against the Central Cabal. After the Great War, the school remained and kept training eximi, those with extraordinary abilities, and esoterics, those with magical knowledge, so that they can use their abilities to the fullest in the modern world. Quite a few graduates go on to work for the Seven Cities, but most graduates go on to work for themselves, freelancing. I have no idea why they put freelancing in quotation marks. The school put a lot of stress on individualism, independence, and personal strength. I didn't think much about it until I got to the part about why the school was called Agamemnon's Academy. There was an old Hellenese myth about a great hero named Agamemnon who led a massive attack against the city of Troy when his sister-in-law eloped with the king of the Trojans. So, Agamemnon faced many challenges in his war, including having to sacrifice his daughter, Iphigenia, to get a more favorable wind for his fleet. And when his daughter was turned into a doe, after the sacrifice, he hunted her down and sacrificed her again to guarantee his victory in the coming battle. He then proceeded to burn Troy to the ground, leaving only Helen, his sister-in-law, alive to bring back to his brother. The handbook talked about this tale gleefully, saying how Agamemnon was justified. He needed a better wind. He loved his brother. The Trojans insulted him. He needed a great victory for the Hellenes. The handbook talked about him admirably, talking about how he could kill legions of soldiers with ease, and how the goal of all of the students would be to live like him, feared and respected, even thousands of years after our deaths. That power and respect was its own goal, and that seeking them out would make us happy. While I didn't have the desire to burn a kingdom to the ground, nor did I have a desire to slay an invulnerable hero with an arrow to the heel, power did appeal to me. The idea of finally being strong enough that no one and nothing could hurt me. If I could be strong enough not to need anyone, then no one could hurt me. I wouldn't be abandoned by anyone because they wouldn't ever have the chance to abandon me. I had the Rethen device, and its power was clearly great. Maybe it would be my key to a good life if I could figure it out. I removed the device from my pocket as I looked over its face. The 12 beautiful stones aligned with the birthstones of the 12 months of the year. I gently stroked the beautiful brass as I was lost in thought. I have never used this device since I started living with Charlotte, but even so, I never let the device out of my sight. Something deep inside of me got anxious at even the idea of the device being out of reach. It felt like a guarantee that the Rethen device would be used against me. Sure, it could make me big and powerful, but I also knew it could make me smaller. Being smaller felt dangerous, more vulnerable. I had already spent so long being vulnerable. The idea of willingly being vulnerable only made my blood boil. After giving myself a minute to cool down, I looked over the birthstones of the face when I realized I had my sobriquet. That night in the cafeteria, I ate alone. Apparently, it was open 24 hours a day, so that students could eat at their convenience. A few students served the meals, of which there was plenty of food. I chose a triangular flatbread that was topped with red tomato sauce, melted cheese, and a few pieces of chicken. It was quite savory, and apparently it was a delicacy in Imperial City. After eating 2 more pieces of the flatbread, I made my way to the library, another function of Agamemnon's that was open 24 hours a day. Most of the services were offered in some capacity, 24 hours a day. Most of the classrooms were closed at night, but still, the school offered plenty of places for studying. In the library, I began my search for where I came from. I learned plenty about this world, and I knew I was going to learn a lot more. However, I had to know, what did this school know about where I came from? Would I be welcome if they knew I was from Lockhart? Or would I be treated as a monster? Finding a book about Lockhart turned out to be difficult. In fact, there were no books about Lockhart at all. So I expanded my search, and sure enough, I found a book that referenced Lockhart in an old book about Altus. Altus turned out to be short for All That Is. It was understood that dimensions beyond Earth existed, and a few of those dimensions were catalogued. Places like Primeval, Pandemonium, and LCL had massive chapters about them. Chapters I only skimmed, but they seemed more like fairy tales than places that could be visited. Dinosaurs, demons, angels, those were the stories I grew up on in storybooks, but this book was very explicit that they were real. But then there were places that weren't nearly as well understood. Eclipse was a world with a star so dark and so large that it dominated the sky every day, but what lived there and what they did was unknown to the authors of the book. And then there were places like Lockhart. My world, my history, my culture, who I was as a person, everything that made me, me, was in that book. And what they covered barely fit on a single page. And that page had a drawing that took up over half the page. A picture of a young blonde white girl holding a white rabbit, with the name beneath it being Adansi. While I had never seen Adansi in person, I had seen many drawings and stories of her. Adansi was neither blonde nor white, and the words beneath just caused my heart to sink even more. Lockhart is an odd place that was discovered by Adansi thousands of years ago. Many of the flora, fauna, and people resemble something from a Charles Dodgson storybook. The people often speak in riddles and are not friendly to people from Earth. Any items taken from Lockhart retains its power, even on Earth. And that was it. There was so much about where I came from. I could fill this book with everything I knew about Lockhart. Hell, I could fill every book in this library with knowledge from Lockhart, and I would still have more to tell. The book told nothing about the stationary sun and moon. It didn't say anything about the upside-down city of sleep. It didn't tell of the talking flowers nor the friendly rabbits. It didn't tell about how we resolved conflicts with long talks and games. It didn't tell about a lost girl who was forced from her home. It didn't even scratch the surface of what Lockhart meant to me, or everything Lockhart was. There were pages and chapters about the specific demon lords of Pandemonium, but Lockhart was barely worth a paragraph and a whitewashed drawing. They wouldn't hate me from being from Lockhart. As far as anyone knew in this school, was that Lockhart was from a fairy tale, if they even knew that much. Once my sadness and anger finally cooled, I put the book back where it came from. I wouldn't tell anyone where I came from on Monday. There was no telling how they would react, and most likely they wouldn't even care if they did know. Not caring was not the same thing as being accepting, however, so I would have to keep it a secret. That Sunday was quiet. Most of the students were moving into their dorms, but similar to the City of Sleep, no one was making eye contact with each other. Unlike the City of Sleep, though, they weren't avoiding each other. They spoke to each other, but the way they talked, it was like every word was chosen carefully, and everyone was examining each other carefully, always watching for a slip-up or something they can use. A few students tried talking to me, but after a few words, they gave up and tried speaking to someone else. I didn't give them anything, but I also didn't talk like everyone else. It is hard to explain, but my words weren't like theirs. They could understand me just fine, but something about the way I spoke made them feel unsafe to talk to me. Not that I minded, but it was odd. Monday was the day of my first classes, and in my very first class, I made a friend. More specifically, I think he chose me to be his friend. My first class was called Adulting 101, where we were supposed to learn tasks and skills to be successful adults. Our first day was about networking and the importance of knowing names and contact information about our neighbors. It was there I gave my sobriquet for the first time. Birthstone. No one knew why, but my name was hardly the oddest name there. My neighbor was a boy who had a backpack covered in stickers. He had his sobriquet emblazoned on his backpack, Violent Valiant, and he was so proud of his name and everything else it seemed. While I sat near the back listening to the teacher, explaining the importance of networking, Valiant sat next to me talking about everything, it seemed. He talked about how he was from Cathedral City, and about how he got his powers from special alchemical formulas of his own creations, how he was on scholarship, and how he was proud of his creations. I also learned the hard way that all of my classmates all had the same classes together, and Valiant decided to keep sitting next to me. Even though I was trying to learn from the teacher, I also found myself learning from Valiant also. When lunch came around, I started responding to what he was saying. By dinner time, we were having actual conversations. While I didn't think anything was going to happen with Valiant, I decided it was better to remain friends with him, at least for now, and probably remain friends, since clearly he knew his world better than me, and having friends was going to come in handy when I was going to try and fit in. And all I have to do is listen, and he likes me enough to consider me his best friend. That was an easy enough trade-off. Maybe things weren't going to be terrible in this school.